Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 3 TA session of Design of Steel Structures taught by Professor Damodar Maiti. I'm Trisha Chakraborty, one of the course teaching assistants. I'm a PhD student at IISc Bangalore, and today's in the previous two classes, I will start with a recap. But the main topic of today, we will start with connection design because in steel structures, connection is a very important. It's a very critical component of the structures of the structure as a whole, because unlike concrete, steel is not cast as a single integrated unit. It is like the individual components are assembled at the site. So to ensure that, usually when we have a beam column joint, or a floor like a slab and a column junction, slab or beam junction, usually when we do design, we assume that there is the moment is fixed there, like there is some resisting moment and there is no mutual, like no relative rotation between those two components. So when we are doing it with concrete, we are casting the beam, the like you would have seen how concrete buildings are cast, like from the foundation, then the column, then the floor, like it is from bottom up, it is completely cast together in phases. So that automatically, when you are casting, you have a form work, you have a like a beam to cast a beam and then a column, and you're pouring the concrete together, so it automatically fixes the rotation. But when I'm doing it with steel, like I have a beam, I have a suppose a I section for the beam, and I have a channel section for the column. To I am joining them, I have to ensure that the connection, the joint between the two is fixed enough, rigid enough, so that it does not error rotation. So that is like that is just one aspect, like it's not just to stop rotation. Overall, for structural integrity, connections are very important. And another reason why connection design is so given so much importance in this course as well, and in any design of steel structures, is often connections end up being the weak link in a structure. So connections have to be designed with great care, because weak link in the sense that if a structure collapses, there will be, like, the structure does not collapse, like everything does not fail together, like there are some components which will fail and which might trigger a chain reaction. So if a connection fails, it's very fatal, because it can trigger like it can trigger a snowball effect kind, and that part of the building might entirely collapse or something. So, and connections, in history also, in like major failures of steel structures, connections have often been the weak link. So connection design is very important. The UG course usually looks at bolts and weld. So today we look at bolts. To next class also, because there is another topic called eccentric bolts, and then we'll look at welds in week 5. And then I think we'll move on to tension members. Okay, so I'll start with a brief recap of the previous classes. There are two broad branches of structural engineering: analysis and design. Analysis is the forward problem, where we are given everything about the structure, like we know the width and depth and length of the member, we know the material, we know the boundary conditions, fixed, hinged, roller support, we know the entire applied loading profile. they come like in point load, uniformly distributed load, concentrated moment, and we have to find the response induced in the structure. We know everything about the structure, the entire configuration is known, and the entire loading and boundary condition, everything is known, and we want to find how the structure is responding. So we want to find out the stresses, the strains, the developed bending moment, shear force, axial force, torsional moment. We want the deflection profile along the length of the beam, or we want the sway of the column. We want the settlement of the foundation. So basically, these are all like the problem is fixed. The problem is straightforward. It's more like we have the structure, we have its cause like the loads, and we want to find out the effect. So there can be only one answer for this, obviously, because it's a physical phenomenon. It's like a physics problem which can have only one answer. But design is not that simple. Design is the inverse problem, where we are given the loads to be withstood by a structure and some criteria on maximum deflection, etc. And we are given some guidelines about the dimension, some guidelines about what material to be used, because they are not like uh, we have some arrangement, and the dimensions are fixed due to architectural constraints, and the materials is also, the materials are like, it's not exactly fixed that we have to use exactly this material everywhere. Like there's this grade of concrete, there might be two three options, but but again, we cannot use just any option, because it's a practical, like the ultimate purpose is that that whatever we are designing has to be constructed in real life. So the promoter or whoever is like conducting the project, they will have some access to some material. They are going to give the engineer some options, like try to keep it within these grades of concrete, these grades of steel. So we have a lot of constraint, we have a lot of requirements, but we also have some freedom, because nothing is exactly fixed. Like the architect will give us a drawing, but we cannot say, we cannot guarantee that we will exactly follow those dimensions and that arrangement, because it might not be viable. It might be making the structure unstable somehow, if there is torsion, if there is excessive deflection or settlement when we do the analysis. So we have to, in design, we have to find the optimum size of the structural elements, the materials, the connectivity. We have to propose a, like a full design, a full drawing of the entire structure. And it is an iterative process, because we will, to do the first stage analysis, we have to assume a particular arrangement and design. We assume it, we do an analysis, we carry out a lot of safety checks. Last class we have also seen limit state design. We follow the philosophy of limit state design, which means that the factored load and a factored capacity, the factored capacity has to be less, greater than the factored load. So that limit state has to be satisfied for every failure mode of every component in the structure. So once everything is satisfied, only then we can say that the design is safe. Otherwise, we have to redesign. Like we have to increase dimensions, we have to increase. We might have to use a stronger material, and then we'll again do carry out another analysis step, and then carry out the checks again. And so it's an iterative process till we find everything is fine. And so obviously, if we start with different designs initially, we are proposing something. So two people are very likely to come up with different designs. So design is not a, like a design problem is not a direct straightforward physics problem that will have only one solution. It can have different solutions, and that is where you can, like the better knowledge we have of all the options we have, we can come up with the best economical design. We move to materials. Steel versus concrete. Concrete is the most versatile material for construction. It is cheap, it is easy to it is easy to mix, easy to procure, easy to mix at the site and just cast. And like the laborers and the design engineers also, they all have more expertise. They tend to have more expertise in concrete than steel, because concrete is more widely used. So everything is easier with concrete. So why do we use steel? Why would we use steel? One is, steel is much stronger than conventional concrete, obviously, because steel is a metal. Steel is a single, like it's an alloy, and concrete is like a heterogeneous mixture of some stuff, the cement and water and coarse and fine aggregates. And steel is stronger. It in now concrete concrete has no virtually Concrete has virtually no strength in tension at all. So even when we are building a concrete building, we cannot build a plain concrete building. We build reinforced concrete buildings. I'm saying building, but I mean structures, RCC buildings. So that means RCC structures. So concrete takes the compression, and there will be reinforcements inside the steel reinforcements. Usually, it can also be fiber reinforcements. So they take the tension. They take, in the sense, withstand the tension. But steel is obviously stronger, much stronger in tension. But steel is also stronger in compression. So steel is overall a much higher, more stronger material. Steel also has high strength to weight ratio due to low density, and also like thin sections, very thin sections, like the web of a standard ISMB 200 web section is 5.7 millimeters. So the dimensions of steel sections are much lesser than usually the dimensions of concrete cross sections. So the overall structure tends to be much lightweight in steel. So particularly, it's particularly useful for very high rise buildings. Tall buildings have a self weight issue, right? The dead load is the self weight of the structure. The higher, the taller the building is, the more the weight increases, and to withstand that weight, you have to increase the dimensions of the elements, and that is going to further increase the structural weight. So it's a bad loop to fall in. So steel is usually used for high transmission towers, tall buildings, high-rise structures, and bridges also. And steel is ductile compared to concrete. Concrete ductility mathematically means that more area captured under the stress strain curve. I'll have the curve here. So see, this part is what makes steel ductile, because we know that the C and D points are the yield points. Even after yielding, see this part is like flat. The stress is not going up too much, but the strain is increasing a lot. That means that a lot of deformation is happening. Even after it has yielded, it is deforming up to a long time, a long period of time, and then it is failing. So this automatically means that the area under the stress strain curve is higher than if it was brittle. It will just go here, yield, and break. If it breaks here, if the fracture point, instead of being here, if it was here, then this would be the area under the stress strain curve. But instead, it goes this, plastically deforms a lot. So the area under the stress strain curve is higher. So mathematically, that is the definition of ductility. Physically, it means that it allows a lot of deformation before it fails, even after it has yielded, and that is a good property because it gives us a lot of warning time. It may, yeah, let us evacuate a structure if something is about to collapse, and it can also give us warning too that we need to get a repair done. So it might save money in the long run. Steel is, however, much costlier than concrete, so we don't use it for simple residential institutional buildings. We use it for a slightly specific structures. Why do we need design? The components individually and the entire structure should withstand the load throughout its lifespan, satisfying serviceability criteria. Serviceability criteria is related to the deformation, deflections, and uh, corrosion, those things which don't directly relate to the collapse or failure of a structure, like not a catastrophic failure of the structure, but there are other requirements which I have on my structure. I cannot let a beam deflect too much. I cannot let my foundation settle too much. There will be other implications of that, even if the structure doesn't actually collapse. So there are a set of serviceability criteria, and there are, of course, every failure mode of every component, like uh, shear force in every section of every beam, bending moment in every section of every beam. But actually, if we have the beam and we know that the bending moment distribution is this, then if it's under, like, bending moment will have a distribution. So if the maximum bending moment is a particular section, we know that if it fails in bending, it will fail along that cross section. So basically, the for every component, the most critical of all the types of forces, bending moment, shear force, torsional moment, axial force. Torsion is usually generally not allowed in structure, so remove that. Axial loading, especially for columns, and bending moment and shear force, especially for beams. So every beam and every column will have these limit states associated to it. That means that the section with the highest bending moment should not undergo more bending moment than its bending moment capacity. So that kind of limit states. So all these failure modes will have one limit state associated with it. So all of them must be satisfied, and plus the serviceability criteria also must be satisfied. And this requirement is for the lifespan. The lifespan is not infinite, because there is degradation, corrosion, fatigue failure, and all that. So 50 years, 75 years after that, we will expect that the structure has degraded, the material has degraded, and we will have to undergo, we will, the structure has to undergo health monitoring, and then it might have to undergo major repair. But I want that the components individually and the structure as a whole, like the structure as a whole also have some failure modes like sway and like torsion. So all of these, whatever limit states I have, they have to be satisfied throughout its lifespan. To properly design a structure, we have to ensure it is economical to construct without compromising safety, cost-effective design. Now, we cannot make a structure infinitely safe. We cannot like give extremely large sections, extremely expensive, high-grade material. If we do that, the structure will not remain economical anymore. It will cost so much that it won't be able to recover the construction cost, and there would be no point in constructing the structure, because civil engineering is a practical subject. We are doing it, it's a very practical, like a practical branch of engineering. We are doing it directly with the people in the industry, and they are doing it for a purpose. Like anything that is being built with a purpose. If it becomes unaffordable, if it becomes ridiculously expensive, then there is no point in constructing it. But at the same time, safety cannot be compromised against. So safety is obviously foremost, but we cannot again keep on making it infinitely safe. So when do we draw the line? So that is why we have the IS codes, the Indian standard codes, and that is why we have limit state design, which implicitly, by factoring a multiplicative factor with the loads and a divisive factor with the strengths, it automatically inherently introduces some reliability, some safety in every limit state individually. So that is why we can follow the IS codes. We have to follow the IS codes. We cannot make the structure unsafe than what the IS codes say. We can make it safer, but then those constraints also depend on the whoever you are working with, the client who has given you the project. They will say that no, we cannot give so much material, reduce the dimension of the beam. Then we have to see that how much we can reduce without actually violating the limit states in the IS codes. So we have to hit a cost effective design, and for that we need to know all the clauses in the IS code. IS 800 2007 is the steel design code here. So it is very important to know the this. Anyone has any doubt? If anyone has any doubt, they can unmute and ask.
Ma'am, today also you are continuing the same session of last week.
Same session of?
Last week,
No. This is just a recap for 10-15 minutes. Then I'll go on to bolt design.
uh,
Bolt design for 2 weeks, and then weld design. So three this week, and the next 2 weeks is for connection design. Okay. The mechanical properties of steel, the physical properties of structural steel, as detailed by clause 2.2.4.1 of IS 800 2007. It is the Indian standard code for steel design. Irrespective of its grade, there are five properties which we can take constant at the mean. Unit mass of steel, the density, modulus of elasticity, which is the Young's modulus, which is the slope of the stress strain curve initially. Then the Poisson's ratio, zero point 0.3, modulus of rigidity. These three, the Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio, and modulus of rigidity, these three are related. Like they are fixed by one equation. So only two of these are independent. And the coefficient of thermal expansion alpha, 12 into 10 to the power minus 6 per degree centigrade. This is relevant because steel, like if there is if we are expecting temperature fluctuations in a particular zone, the steel can expand or contract. That will also introduce some thermal stresses. So we need that, and the unit mass or the density we need for calculating the self weight. So all of these properties have some implications which we will need in design. But the most important properties are the yield stress and the ultimate stress. The principal mechanical properties of structural steel which we use in design directly, we'll see that today since we are starting the proper like problem solving first problem solving session, we'll see that Fy and Fu, these terms keep cropping up in the formula in the limit states. The low roll steel sections, the Bureau of Indian, right now we are starting with connections. So we are not directly going to work with these sections, but when we go to tension member, compression members, we will see that these sections we are using. The Bureau of Indian Standards publishes IS Handbook number 1 that tabulates weight per unit length, geometric dimensions, and other dimensions for various types of steel sections. So, I section, joist, channel section, angle section, T sections. Then there are some closed hollow sections and some flat plates, bars, which are small solid sections. And the stress strain or elasticity curve of steel, this is obtained by carrying out a standard tensile test on a cylindrical specimen. So we increase the tension in tensile load step by step. So this load P we note down for each step, and at each step we pause and we calculate the strain as well. We note down the strain using a measurement device like a strain gauge. So once we have that data, we divide the load at each step by the cross sectional area to get the stress, and we have the strain. So we have a stress strain, like we have some stress strain data, suppose 10 points, and then we will plot them in this the x-axis is strain, the y-axis is stress, and we are going to plot that, join it by a best fit curve, and see that it comes out something like this. So here A is a limit of proportionality, the point at which the linear nature of the stress strain graph ceases. That is, up to A, the Hooke's law is followed, that stress is proportional to strain, and this slope is the Young's modulus, 200 MPa. Then B is elastic limit, the limiting point for the condition that the material behaves elastically. But in A to B, Hooke's law does not apply. It is A to B is non-linear, but up to B it is still elastic. That means that the beyond elastic limit there will be some permanent deformation or permanent set when the load is removed. But up to B we can load, and if we remove the load completely, the entire, like that, it will return to its original configuration. It will not have any residual strain, so it will completely be like before it was before. But once we cross the elastic limit, there will be some residual set which we cannot remove again. C and D are the upper and lower yield points. They are almost together, like almost the same points after which the strain increases without correspondingly high increase in load or stress. This is the point, the Fy point, the yield stress point, which the stress corresponding to C is Fy, and the stress corresponding to E, it is the Fu, ultimate or maximum tensile stress. This is the highest point in the elasticity curve. So this is the yield stress point, and this is the ultimate stress point. And after E, we'll see that the graph goes down, so we cannot load the structure beyond E. It is the ultimate tensile stress. It cannot take any more stress. It will anyway, once it crosses E, it deforms a little more and then it breaks. So F is the fracture point, the point where the material breaks. Modes of failure, we have looked at in details in last class. There are some modes of failure which each corresponds to a limit state: bending, local buckling, shear buckling, web crushing and buckling, lateral torsional buckling. So a lot of these buckling methods are there, buckling modes of failure are there in steel sections, unlike in concrete. In concrete we were just concerned with bending and shear mostly. All these buckling modes come because buckling is a phenomenon that happens in thin cross sectional areas. So there is buckling is like, it's an instability mode of failure. It's not really collapse. It's like a thin sheet of paper. If you put it under compression, it buckles. It doesn't crack or anything, but it buckles. That is a instability failure, and that happens. That is very critical in steel sections because a lot of the dimensions of the webs and flanges or the beam as a, like the cross section as a whole, is very thin, therefore of the order of a few millimeters. So buckling is a critical issue here, and deflection is a serviceability limit state. So all of these are will correspond to uh, this is all of these will correspond to ultimate or collapse limit states, and this will correspond to a serviceability limit state. Design philosophy is working stress method and limit state method. We are using limit state method. All the codes right now, IS 800, IS 456, and all around the world, limit state method is being used. This limited method of design considers all relevant conditions pertaining to limit states of service strength and serviceability. So here, all the first six were strength limit states, and the last one was serviceability limit states. The basic concept is that the design action has to be less than equal to the design strength. Today we'll see what is the design action, what is the design strength when we go into the formulas. So we'll start with connections now. Connections are integral parts of any steel structure that have a major role in overall integrity. As I said in the beginning of the class, it's integrity in the sense it fixes the moment. It like introduces a fixity in the structure. Standard parts are properly connected to create the steel structures. They assemble at the site, and connections make up a large amount of the cost of structural steel. Connection design should be given top priority for both safety and structural economy. There are of two types, bolts and welds. Like there can be other types of connections, but we usually use bolts or welds. They are the main ones used in IS 800 as well. A bolt is a, you would have seen, bolt is basically, it has a shank, it has a head, and then it has a nut. So when we are joining two structural elements members, we are going to drill a hole. If the shank has a diameter of 6 mm, we are going to drill a hole with the diameter slightly larger than 6 mm. So we drill a hole through both the members. Then we hold the members together, we put the insert the shank inside, and then we tighten the nut. We tighten it like a screw, so it will, so it like presses the two members together. And welds, on the other hand, is a completely different mechanism. Bolt is an additional separate steel. Bolts are small steel separate steel elements. Welding is done, if I want to join these two members, welding is done, is it's a electric arc. We do with electric arcs. Usually we make the part, we put some metal, we have a welding rod, and we heat it up, and the rod and that part of the metal melts, and if we take it along the junction, like if we are joining these two like this, then along this line, the junction, we are going to take the molten metal, and then as it solidifies, it creates a fixity there. So welding is a slightly more complicated process than bolting. Bolting is is an easy process, and bolts are also very easy to replace. Weld is kind of a permanent joint. Bolted connections. Method to join structural components with the help of bolts. It is simple to use and don't use any extra equipment, in the sense the electric arc and all that. It's just we need the bolt and the nut. Process for establishing a bolted connection involves the following steps. Members to be connected are overlapped. Then the bolt holes are drilled on the overlap portion. The diameter of the bolt hole is slightly larger than the diameter of the bolt. Bolts are inserted into the hole with washers at their position. Nuts are inserted in the shank position and tightened with the help of spanners. Due to the tightening of the nut, clamping action is developed in the bolt, which are transferred to the plates. So basically, the tightening, it's like the bolt is introducing a compression kind of action. So there is a very strong compressive clamping between the two members. So that also introduces a friction. We know that friction is the coefficient of friction into normal reaction. So if I am pressing the two surfaces together very hard, then the normal reaction transfer between them is high. So the static friction to be generated, if I am trying to pull them apart, if I am applying a tension on the two members, tensile force, then the friction itself will try to resist it. And advantages and disadvantages of bolts. Every almost every structural design approach has advantages and disadvantages. Bolts have simple design, easy operation, low cost, low noise, less time, less manpower, and less skilled labor required, and it's easily available. It is a non-permanent joint. This is important because if there is some damage to a joint, it is very easy to replace. It won't cost much money. It won't require any sort of dismantling much. We just have to take out the bolt and do it again. No risk of heating operation and easy replacement. Disadvantage: accuracy of joints depend on tightening, less axial tensile strength, high effect of vibration, more weight because it's a separate element, proper lubrication requires protection against corrosion. Now the types of bolted joints, the qualitative types. There is lap joint and butt joint. In lap joint, the two members to be connected and overlapped. So this is the member, and this is a 3D view. Like, this is another member below it, and see, this is the overlap portion. Now we look at the top view is this is one section on top. This is the one member, and the other member, this part is in the bottom, and we drill the holes like this, and we put the bolts. So this is a single bolted lap joint. Single bolted because there is only one line of bolting here. Then there is a double bolted lap joint, in the sense here I have two members and I have two lines of bolting here. On the side view, we will see two lines. Here in the side view, we see one line. So this is double bolted lap joint. So then butt joints are two members to be connected are placed end to end. I want to connect these two members. I place them like this, and then I plate a cover plate on top of it, or on bottom or both, and I bolt both the original members, to the cover plate. So indirectly, they are also bolted together. So this is these are the members to be connected. This is one member. This is one member. They are placed end to end, and then we put this cover plate. and we bolt one. Now this cannot, the butt joint can never have only one line of bolting. We have to bolt it to this member and then have to bolt it to this member. So this is the top view. These are the two members. This is the cover plate on top. One line of bolting with the first member, one line of bolting with the second member. So single cover, single bolted butt joint. Single cover means one cover plate. Here we have single cover, double bolted butt joint. So here single bolted means one line in each plate. Here double bolted means two lines in each plate. And double cover single bolted means double cover means there is a plate on top and there is a plate on bottom. And single because there is one line here, one line here. Now, mechanism of load transfer through bolts, which is important. Load transfer mechanism, identifying that is very important in the design of any structure. So, the transfer of force from one member to another depends on the type of bolt being used. This transfer of force mechanism might be either bearing type, where load transfer occurs by shearing and bearing, or slip critical or slip resistant joint, where the load transfer occurs by friction. This is important, and this is generally which type is the bolt is usually mentioned in the question. So whether it's a bearing type joint or it's a slip critical bolt. In slip resistant connections, the entire force is transferred through friction, and the joints are not really subjected to shear or bearing. The bolts are first brought to snug tight condition and then tightened further. So the tightening is very important here because I need a very high normal reaction between the two plates. So that the normal reaction is high, then the static friction is high, and then everything will be resisted by the friction alone. Joints with so tightened bolts are referred to as pre-tensioned joints, but when the load exceeds the friction resistance, then slippage occurs, and consequently the bolts will be subjected to shearing and bearing and will behave like a bearing type joint. Now, in bearing type joints, see when a friction for slip critical type of for friction bolts, initially it's working through friction. Then if there is a little bit of slip, we know that dynamic friction is less than static friction. So if there is slip, then the friction is not that strong anymore, and then it behaves like an ordinary bearing type joint. But a bolt which was bearing type to begin with, the tightening is not like the tightening or the normal reaction is not that important, or not that important that criteria there, because we assume that there is some slip. We assume that it is not perfectly joined together. There is some slip. I'm allowing it, but the shearing. See, okay. Suppose this is a bolt, and these are the two bolt holes. If I'm allowing some slip, then basically the shearing and bearing means anything that is pressing against something, like bearing a foundation which is lying on soil. The foundation and the soil has a bearing load between each other. Okay, so this is a bolt. Suppose I hope you can see, this is a bolt hole, this is another bolt hole. They are like this, so they are overlapping. If it is if it is a slip critical joint, then the bolt is so tightened that the two surfaces are completely pressed together and there is no mutual slip like this. But when it is a bearing type joint, the tightening is not that, it's not very critical. So I'm assuming there is some slip between the two. But here this is the bolt and this is the bolt hole, so there is a bearing between these two. Like the is pressing when there is a tensile loading, the bolt is pressing upon the side of the bolt hole, and then there is a shear between the two plates as well. So that is why we call it shearing and bearing type. Like it's called bearing type, but shearing and bearing are the two modes through which the bolt will take the load. And now, in even for slip critical bolts, moment there is some slip, it changes from static friction to dynamic friction. So then we will assume that, okay, now the friction, I'm not going to assume that friction is the main resisting factor. I'm going to treat it like just another bearing type bolt. So let's read this again. In slip resistant connections, the entire force is transmitted through friction, and the joints are not really subjected to tension or shear or bending, because I'm not letting it move at all. I'm not letting it move at all. So it's a friction between the plates that is doing the job. The bolt itself is not taking shear that there right then. The bolts are first brought to sunk tight conditions and then tightened further. Joints with so tightened bolts are referred to as pretension joints. But when the load exceeds the frictional resistance, then slippage occurs, and consequently the bolts will be subjected to shearing and bearing and will behave like a bearing tap joint. When high strength bolts are not tightened sufficiently so as to significantly squeeze the plates together, there will be a negligible friction between the plates. Because friction is dependent on normal reaction. If it is not squeezing, if the plates are not squeezing together, then the friction is not worth mentioning. It's not really going to contribute to the load bearing mechanism. On load application, the plates slip a little. That doesn't mean it slips completely away because there is a still a bolt holding it in place. It means there is a slight bit of slip. It's not that the friction is working, it's transferring the load in some other mechanism, and the load will tend to shear off the bolts. So here shearing is this kind of thing, right? So when I'm imagine two, you have two plates and imagine there is a bolt through it. If it is undergoing this sort of movement, you will see that the bolt cross section also is undergoing a shearing load at the junction of the two plates. So the plates slip a little and the load will tend to shear off the bolts on the interface and the press or bearing against the side of the bolts. Now the load transfer will behave like a bearing type connection. So I hope it is clear why the shearing and bearing, why the bolt is going to undergo these type of loading. If you have any question, you can stop me and ask, because this part, like this, the visualizing the difference between bearing type and slip friction type bolts took me a lot of time in my UG test. So I think it is very important that you are able to visualize it clearly. So if there is any doubt, you can ask. I'll wait for a bit. If you want to try with, if you have something around you which you can try physically to see what it's actually doing. Civil engineering is a very it's a very visual kind of subject, so that helps a lot. Okay. If there are no doubts, I'll move ahead. So now we will look at the failure modes. Failure modes is very important because it will, as I keep saying, each failure mode corresponds to a limit state, and each limit state has to be satisfied. That is the whole purpose of my design. Like the objective of my design is that each limit state, when we are building a trying to build a whole structure, we have to consider a lot of limit states, every limit states for every element. But right now we are at elemental design, like we are designing only one connection or only one tensor member. So in that case, I just want that the joint itself, all the failure modes of the joint itself must be satisfied, like it cannot fail. So everywhere the capacity has to be more than a design. So what are the types of failure that can happen? These are why the visualization is so important. Shear failure of bolts. When the plates slip due to the applied forces, shear stresses are generated because there is a shearing. So obviously you can imagine that it may be possible that maximum factored shear force exceeds the shear capacity of the bolt. The shear capacity in the sense the bolt is made of some metal, right? So that will have a shear capacity of its own. That if it is subjected to shear larger shear than that, it will shear off, like it will fail like this. The shear failure of bolt takes place at bolt shear plane. However, the bolt may fail in single shear or double shear. So, see, these are the two plates. Suppose this is a two plates where this is bolted like this, and there is a very high shear force at the interface. So the bolt undergoes shear failure at this interface. The bolt will always fail at the interface. It cannot fail in the middle of it. So it fails along this plane. It fails around this plane. Or if there are three members joined together, that is also a possibility, three overlapping members. So there are the bolt is being subjected to two critical shear planes. So it can also happen generally. It's not likely that it will reach the its critical failure shear stress exactly in both the interfaces. Generally it will fail in one interface first, but it can also happen that it is sheared off from both interfaces. So I was like, my MTech project was related to connections, steel connections. So I had this to try this experiment in lab once. It was a moment bearing connection. Like it has a column, and there is a like it's a small column. There is a beam, and they are joined by angle sections. Like angles, like one angle will be angle is a this kind of thing. So one angle is this leg is bolted to the beam. This leg is bolted to the column. So similarly, below also there is one angle. One leg, the upper leg, this leg is bolted to the column. This leg is bolted to the beam. So this it's a moment resisting connection. And when you apply a point load on the tip, it's a cantilever beam. The connection is like the joint, the beam column junction is where the connection is there. That is my area of study, and I'm applying a load at the tip of the cantilever. I'm slowly increasing the connection, slowly increasing it. So I had done simulations on that. Like, what do we do usually here? We do when we want to analyze a structure, we don't usually do it by hand anymore. We use softwares. We use Abacus. Abacus is one of the softwares for analysis. So I had some theoretically I knew that when the load crosses this limit, these two bolts are supposed to fail in shear. So it actually happened. Like when experiments validate what you have gotten in a simulation, that means your simulation is correct. So like when it crossed that critical limit, there was like a large noise, and you could see that the bolts had fallen off. The two bolts which were the critical ones, the bolts below, I think, the below bolts which were connecting the angle to the beam, they were supposed to fail. So the pieces of the bolts were like fallen on the ground. The moment of failure is a very sudden thing, so there will be a loud noise, and you will see that something has failed. Then you have to see what has failed. It generally doesn't everything doesn't collapse all at once, but the bolt pieces were falling on the ground. And it was like, this is if this is the bolt shank and this is the head, if this was the shear plane, then it exactly there it had broken off. So there was one part which had only the shank, there was another part which had the shank and the head, and also the surface between the two, like the surface which had been sheared off was very bright shiny silver because it had just been newly sheared off. The rest part of it was a kind of rusted color. So it's very interesting. It's Civil engineering is a very interesting subject if you can see it practically. So basically, this shearing off is like the shear failure is like the shank part will be cleaved off like this, and it will break into two parts or more. This is shear failure. Then bearing failure of bolts. Here the bolt gets crushed along a semi-circumference. What does this mean? This means that this is the bolt hole, like in a magnified way. This is the bolt hole, and this is the bolt. Suppose this is the bolt hole, this is the bolt, and when when there's been some push and pull happening, the bolt is pressing along the side of the bolt hole. So there is a crushing kind of, it can happen like, if this force becomes too high, the material of the bolt and the bolt hole, they might crush against each other. So the plate may be strong in bearing, and it may happen that the heaviest stressed plate may press against the bolt shank as shown here. See, this is bearing. So this is a top view. What I showed here also was a top view from this angle. So this is the bolt hole. This is one plate, this is one another plate below it. So this is the, it's like the bolt is like pressing into the bolt hole, and there is a crushing phenomenon happening here. So this is bearing on plate and bolt. So the in general, bearing failure of bolts do not occur in practice except when the plates are made of high strength steel and its corresponding bolts are made of low grade steel. So generally, connections are the metal which is used in the bolts. Usually that has a higher grade of steel than the plates around. So what happens? See, if it's a if two surfaces are bearing against each other, then obviously the metal or the component which is weaker in compression is going to fail first. That is natural, right? So when I have a bolt material and when I have a plate material, they are different materials and they are pushing against each other with equal force. That means the weaker material will fail first. Weaker material in compression, because bearing is a compression type loading. It's like compression, it's not tension. So generally the bolts are made of stronger material. So it means that the plate gets crushed, not the bolt. But whether the plate gets crushed or the bolt, it's a failure anyway. So when we are trying to design a bolt, when we are doing bolt design, we don't mean that just the bolt should stay intact. We mean that the connection should stay intact. So neither bearing of the bolt is allowed, nor the bearing of the plate is allowed. Okay, then there is one more, tension failure of bolts. Bolts subjected to tension may fail at the stress area. In case any of the connecting plates are flexible enough, in that case, additional forces due to prying action has also to be considered. Like the tension, like if the bolt undergoes tension, tension means like this. So if this is the bolt, this action is tension. Then tension or tearing failure of plates. This is also important because as I said, it's not just about the bolts. We have to see that the plate area along the bolt is also not failing. So tension failure of plate occurs when the bolts are stronger than the plates, and tension on both the gross area and the net effective area. This yielding and rupture, these concepts we will see. Like this is difficult to explain without the exact equations. We'll go on into it. Must be considered. This is tension failure. It's very simple to understand. Tension failure is just that you're pulling, and the bolt is stronger, so the plate just breaks off like this. So this is tensile failure. This is shear failure. In shear failure, there is a rubbing sort of against two surfaces. Tension failure is when it just breaks off like this straight. Tearing, that's why the word tearing is being used. Like if you take a piece of paper and you hold it perfectly like horizontal, and you apply a tensile load on two sides, the way it will break off, that is tearing. That is how exactly how tension failure of plates happen. Then there is bearing failure of plates. When ordinary bolts are subjected to shear forces, then slip takes place and the bolts come in contact with the plates. It may be quite possible that the plate gets crushed. So, see, bearing failure of bolts and bearing failure of plates, the mechanism is the same. The phenomenon is the same. It's that the bolt and the bolt hole are pressing against each other, pressing up, like applying a very high compression on each other. But whichever is weak will fail first. So bearing failure of bolts happens when the bolt is made of weaker material, which is rare, and bearing failure of plate is a more critical thing because usually the bolts are made of stronger material. So when ordinary bolts are subjected to shear forces, ordinary in the sense not slip critical ones, then slip takes place and the bolt comes in contact with the plates. It may be quite possible that the plate gets crushed if the plate material is weaker than the bolt material. This is, I think, this one. This bearing failure gets complicated further due to the presence of nearby bolts or nearness of an edge in load direction. The bearing strength gets affected by bolt spacing and the edge distance. One of the possible modes of failure resulting from too much bearing is the shear tear out at the end of the connected member. So there is a kind of this we will look at. These are very specific modes of failure. And block shear failure, again this is also a very again a thing that you need to visualize, otherwise it's very difficult to understand the formula, because you cannot memorize all the formulas. Like there will be one formula, one limit state, formula in the sense capacity higher greater than design. So if I have the bolts, if I have the plates, like the dimensions and the material properties, then I have the capacity of the joint in that particular, like the shear capacity of the bolt, and I will have a developed shear. So the shear capacity greater than developed shear, that is my basic limit state. So I will have a limit set corresponding to each of these. And if you cannot possibly memorize all these formula, because there will be so many of these, like this is just bolted joints itself will have 4 5 formulas, then eccentric joint, then welds, and then we have that, then outside connections, there are so many topics. So you usually, okay, you can usually access the IS codes, or the formulas are usually given, but know how to calculate each of the terms, you need to have an eye open to understand. So block shear failure, see this is a diagram. It's like this is the, forget the gusset plate term right now. Suppose these are two plates. The block shear failure happens in a way that this line, along this line, like there is a whole break off kind of thing. Like in a block, it shears off. Many a times, bolts have been placed at lesser end distance than required, which leads to leads the plate to shear out, which can be avoided by adherence to edge distance. So there are some edge distance and end distance requirements also given in the IS codes. So block shear failure occurs when a block of material within the bolted area breaks away from the remaining part of the area. So neither the bolts nor the plate is actually breaking, but this zone itself is breaking off. So the line is critical here. This line and this line, along that line there is some weakness due to which is breaking. The bolt will be intact there. The bolts, nothing has happened to it. The possibility failure increases if bolts are used of high strength and fewer bolts are used to make the connection. In this type of failure, shear on one plane and tension on perpendicular plane occurs, leading to fail of a proportion of the plate. We look at all of these. I think we will have bearing type. Okay, we have examples. We'll understand these through the examples better. Specifications of bolted joints. Now the properties. IS 800 2007 defines specifications for bolted joints for safe design. Nominal diameter of bolt, it is the actual diameter of the shank of the bolt basically. Diameter of bolt hole, it is obtained by adding a nominal diameter of bolt with the clearance provided IS 800 has it. So if there is a bolt hole of 6 millimeter, the diameter of the bolt hole will be slightly higher. Now pitch distance, gauge distance, edge distance, all of these should be visualized. So this is pitch is the, if this is the line of action, like this is the line of action of flow force, then pitch is it's the distance between two lines of bolts along the length of the load application. So this is the pitch. This distance is the pitch between these two lines. Then there will be a pitch between these two lines, a pitch between these two lines, and it might not be same, it obviously it might not all be identical, but this is the concept of pitch. So center to center distance between two consecutive bolts, minimum pitch distance should be 2.5 d, where d is the nominal diameter. These are some requirements. So it's a center to center, okay, it's like, see the, this center of the bolt to the center of this line of bolting and the center of this line of bolting, the distance between that. Then gauge is a perpendicular corresponding. So gauge is the line, is the distance between two lines of bolts in the direction perpendicular to the line of application. So distance between adjacent bolt lines. And then there is an edge distance, and then there's an end distance. Edge distance is the distance from the center of the bolt to the edge of the plate in the direction of the gauge, and end distance is the, like the distance between the edge of the plate and the center of the nearest bolt. So this is end distance, this is edge distance. Distance from center of bolt to adjacent edge in direction normal to direction of stress. So see, this is the direction of stress, so edge distance is normal to it. Minimum edge and end distance should be 1.7 d naught for hand cut bolts and 1.5 d naught for machine cut bolts, where d naught is the diameter of bolt hole. So these, see, the edge distance minimum is specified in terms of diameter of bolt hole, and pitch distance minimum is specified in terms of nominal diameter of bolt. So we need to, these are all given, all these specifications are exactly taken from IS 800, but the purpose of the course is to make you understand them. Bearing type connections, shear strength. Now we finally move on to the formula. The shank of the bolt shears along the plane of slip. Okay, are there any doubts so far? I'll wait for 2 minutes. If you need to go back and look at something, then we'll move to the formulas. Make sure you are able to visualize whatever mechanism has been discussed so far. The shank of the bolt shears along the plane of slip, that is at interface. The number of planes along which a bolt can get sheared indicates the number of shear, that is single shear or double shear. The resistance of bolt and shear is referred to as the shear capacity of bolt, which is denoted as VNSB. It depends on the ultimate tensile strength of the bolt, FUB, the number of shear planes L, the nominal area of shank ASB, and the net tensile area ANB of bolt in each plane. So we'll go to these terms one by one. But one thing, the ultimate tensile strength of the bolt FUB. This B is a subscript added for bolt, but FU is the same ultimate tensile capacity thing. Ultimate capacity we saw in this graph. So FU, like this bolt, the bolt itself will have a stress strain curve. So this point, the stress corresponding to this point is what the FUB is for the bolt. Okay, and so the formula is VNSB is the nominal shear capacity of bolt is given by VNSB is FUB by root 3 NN plus into ANB plus NS into ASB. Wait 1 second. Nominal area of shank and the net tensile stress area ANB of bolt in each shear plane. Okay, we'll go into this. We'll look into this in an example, I think. Usually, only one of these terms are considered. Oh, okay, okay. So this S, like this NN is number of shear planes with threads intercepting a shear plane, and NS is number of shear planes without threads intercepting the shear plane. Usually, it's just considered that it's just considered as one term, and we consider only one of these terms where N is the number of shear planes. So one for the two plates and two for three plates being joined, and a NB or ASB, whatever you call it, it is the tensile. It's basically the cross sectional area. So just pi d square for the bolt. Where d is the diameter of the bolt hole, pi d square by 4 is the cross sectional area, and n is the number of planes, and FUB is the ultimate capacity, stress capacity of the beam material of the bolt material. So the formula is that capacity divided by root 3 into the total area of shearing possible. So if there is one plane, like if there are two plates only, then only one cross sectional area we will consider. If there are three plates, so there are two planes possible for the bolt to shear off. So two into cross sectional area. That is as simple as that. The nominal shear capacity of bolts for long joints, long grip length, and with packing plates. There are some modifications, some modification factors. These one is reduction factor to allow for overloading of end bolts. One is reduction factor to allow effect of large grip length. One is reduction factor to account for packing plates in excess of 6 mm. If these are there, like then if these are like if a problem has all this, then this will be explicitly mentioned that this has to be the reduction factor, or you will be given the code to refer to. Usually just consider the first simple part of the formula. So bearing type connections, bearing strength. In bearing, neither the bolt nor the metal in contact with the bolt fails in bearing, but the magnitude of bearing stress does affect the efficiency of the connected parts. So IS specifications put a limit on the nominal bearing strength above which it is considered that the strength of the connected part gets impaired. Bolts fail in bearing only if the bolts used are of very low grade. Thus, bearing strength of bolted connection is a function of strength of the connected plates and the arrangement of the bolts, irrespective of the grade of bolt. So, usually, bolts are made of higher grade material. So, we are assuming that the bolt is not failing in bearing, the plate is failing in bearing, but the arrangement of the bolts does matter in this bearing part. One of the possible failure modes in bearing is shear tear out at the end of the connected member, shown here. Like the bolt, it's like the bolt is pressing into the bolt hole, and there is a like it goes through it, like it goes like this. It's not a shear failure. It's like there is a tear along the length of the plate. This tear can either take place either at the end of a connected part or between two holes in the direction of the bearing load. In order to prevent too much elongation of bolt hole, an upper limit is placed on the nominal bearing strength of the bolt. The upper limit is the projected area times the ultimate tensile strength of the connected parts. So see, this is the formula. It is given in this clause in IS 800. VNPB is 2.5 kb DTFU. So FUB is the ultimate tensile strength of the bolt, which is not there in this formula, but it will be there here in part of some other formula, part of some of these terms. Uh, Fu is the ultimate tensile strength of the plate. See, this is there in this formula because I'm assuming the plate is the critical one. D is the nominal diameter of bolt, not the bolt hole. T is aggregate thickness of connecting plates. That means you have to add up the connection, add up the thicknesses. And KB, this okay, where is this KB? I'll show that as part of the problem. The KB connect like the this factor itself has this FUB term in it. It is a multiplicative factor. So this is the bearing capacity of the plate. It's the capacity of the plate in bearing. This is the capacity of the bolt in shearing. Now this is the capacity. The normal tensile capacity of the bolt is given by TNB is 0.9, FUB ANB. This is very simple. Like tension is a force term, F is a stress term, A is an area term. The unit of stress is Newton per millimeter square. The unit of area is millimeter square, and when you multiply them you get a force type term. So ultimate tensile strength of bolt is FUB, FYB is yield stress of bolt, and ANB is net tensile strength of area of bolt. Now the factor 0.9 account for safety at ultimate load. For bolt to be safe in tension, the factor tension force TB on the bolt should be less than the design tensile strength of the bolt, and the net tensile strength of the bolt is given by given by minimum of two. Okay, one is, see, this one is has ultimate thing, the FUB, and this one is FYB. So we put at point 0.9 because the ultimate load case is even more critical. So point 0.9 ultimate into ultimate stress into net area divided by a factor of safety, and the minimum of this and the yield. This is the yielding kind of failure. So FYB into ASB divided by this. ASB is the shank area of bolt. ANB is the net tensile area, stress area of the bolt. This as table 2.2. Let's have okay. I'll download the IS 800. So section 10 is connections, bearing type bolts. 73. Connections. So effective area of both, so this A and B, ASB, these all these, see where it can be shown. The threads do not occur in the shear place. This may be taken as a cross sectional area. So these all these details are given here. So when you are, this is that formula that we got. All of the formulas that you get in the books are followed by the IS code. Follow the IS code because that is the criteria we have to follow. Then these are those reduction factors here given, the how to calculate the reduction factors. And this is the shear bearing capacity of the bolt. So KB here, KB is the smallest of all of these. E by 3 d naught, P by 3 d naught minus 0.25. So E is the end distance, P is the pitch distance. FUB by FU is the ratio of the ultimate tensile strength of stress of the bolt to the ultimate tensile stress of the plate, and 1. We cannot take it lesser than 1. So this is a this KB term, and the D, T, and FU are quite direct, straightforward. Then now we are moving to tensile capacity. So this is AN is net tensile stress area as specified by the IS, and ASB is the shank area of bolt, and we have to take the minimum of these two here. We'll look at examples. Then there is one more mode called combined tension and failure, shear and tension. Generally, in eccentrically loaded connection, the bolt is subjected to tension and shear both. One of the cases is where T section is connected to the column flange by attaching a bracing member. Then the combined effect of tension and shear is assessed by the interaction formula. There is an interaction graph. Basically, the ultimate thing has to fall on one side of a line. So the formula of that is the combined effect of tension and shear is assessed by interaction formula to check the safety of the connection as VSB by VDSB. See, this is just VSB is the factor shear force, VDSB is the design shear capacity, TB is the factor tensile load, and TDB is its corresponding capacity. So it's like we are expecting both of these to be below 1, obviously, because VSB has to be less than VDSB. TB has to be less than TDB. These are the separate shear limit state and the tensile limit state. But there is an additional criteria that the ratio square, the sum of the squares of the two ratios also has to be less than 1. So both of them being point 0.9, like suppose both of them are point 0.9, then the total will exceed 1, right? So that is not allowed. If there is like a third criteria. This is also there in the IS code here. Both subject to combined shear and tension. This so I'm showing all these IS code things because to show that whatever formula we find in any standard books, they are all taken from the IS codes, because that is what we have to follow. The books are there to to show which formula are more relevant, but everything is there in the IS codes. Okay, we'll look at a couple of examples. Determine the strength of 20 diameter bolt of grade 4.6 for the following cases: lap joint, single cover butt joint with this thick cover plate, double cover butt joint with this thick cover plate. The main plates to be joints are 14 thick. We use 410 grade of steel for the plates, and the for bolt we have used grade 4.6. Now there is a for Fu 410 steel, the Fu is 410 and Fy is 250 Newton. Okay, now be consistent with the units. We usually use Newton and millimeter. So Newton and millimeter, when they give the stress type, Newton per millimeter square is equal to megapascal, like it is 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter square. So these were known values for 4.6 bolt grade bolt. Now this is you have to know the FUB is 400. The bolt of the bolt grade basically means 4 point something. If it's x dot y, it means that x00 is the FUB, and the 0 point, like the 60% of that is the Fy. So if it was x comma x dot y, then the yield capacity is y, like 0 point y into x00, like that. So 400, and for 60% of 400 is 240. The partial safety factor for bolt material gamma YMB is 1.25. Did anyone ask any question? Hmm? So partial safety factor for bolt material is 1.25. That is also in the IS code. The net tensile stress area for 220 diameter bolt is pi by okay, 0.78. This factor is also given in the IS codes, I guess. Now for lap joint, the bolts are in shingle shear. What is a lap joint? It's like two plates of 14 each thickness is joined by a single line of bolts with 20 diameter. So in lap joint, the bolts are in single shear. Shear strength of bolt is the ultimate bolt capacity, which is 400 into 245, which is the area I calculated. There is only one shear plane, so into 1 divided by root 3 divided by 1.25. So 45.26 kilonewton. The strength of the bolt in bearing, strength of the bolt in shearing is this much. Then the strength of the bolt in bearing, I know this formula: 2.5 into kb into dt fu by gamma mb. For 20 diameter bolt, diameter of bolt hole is 22 millimeter. Again, this is also taken from the IS code. The end distance is 33. We assume the pitch to be 50. So these things you have to assume. So kb is the minimum of these four quantities. So we get that 0.5 is the minimum least of all these. So this Strength of bolt in bearing is 2.5 into zero point 0.5 into 20, which is diameter of bolt, into 14, which is the thickness of the plate, into fu, which is 410 fu, because this is a plate, right? So the plate strength is 410, not 400, divided by 1.25. So 114.8, which is much higher. So the strength of the bolt here is the minimum of the shearing and the bearing capacity, which is 45.26. Now, variation of the problem: single cover butt joint with 10 mm thick cover plates. So, for single cover butt joint with 10 mm thick cover plate, the bolt will be in shingle shear and bearing, but the considered thickness for bearing will be the minimum of the aggregate thickness of the cover plate and minimum thickness of main plates. So, it is 10 millimeter here, not 14 millimeter. So, as computed here, the VSB will be the shingles, the shear capacity will remain the same. The bolt capacity will the bearing capacity will be different. Like I have to take 10 in place of 14, but the ultimate strength remains the same because this is anyway higher than this, still higher than this. Double cover butt joint with 8 mm thick cover plates. Here the bolt will be in double bearing and shearing. There are two cover plates. So now the cover plate thickness is not 8 anymore, it is 16. I have to add them because they are doing the same purpose, the same job. The considered thickness for bearing will be the minimum of aggregate thickness of cover plate, which is 16, and the thickness of main plates, which is 14. So 8 and the minimum of 16 and 14 is 14. So this is but here the she this but the here the so the bearing remains the same as the previous this one, but the shear capacity changes because there are two shearing planes now. So the strength of bolt in double shear is 2 into this, so it is 90.53. So the strength of the bolt is minimum of these two, which is 90.53. uh, was the problem clear?
G.
Okay. So we look at another example. The strength and efficiency of lap joint. Bolts of grade 4.6 and diameter 20 mm are used for making the connection. The plates to be joined at 12 mm and 14 mm thick. So now the arrangement is a little skewed. It is not as straightforward. So for steel of grade 410 FU, and these remain the same as the previous question. For a 20 mm diameter of bolt hole is 22. Tensile stress area of bolt is 245. Partial safety factor is 1.25. Partial safety factor gamma MB, gamma M1, all of these are 1.25. In lap joint, the bolts are in single shear and bearing, where the bearing strength is governed by thickness of thinner plate here. So there was in previous question, both the plates were 14 mm thick. Here there is one is 12 and one is 14. So the 12 mm one will be more critical. So strength of bolt in single shear is the same as previous question exactly, because all the specifications are same. Strength of bolt in bearing is again 2.5 kb dt fu by gamma mb. Here we take 12 in t. Strength of joint per pitch in shear is 2 into 45. Strength of joint per pitch in bearing is we multiply it by 2 because this is the pitch, right, and there are two lines. Tensile strength of plate per pitch is that formula, 0.9 fu an by gamma m1. So here see, to calculate the net area means that the cross sectional area of the plate minus the bolt part. So see, if this is the plate I'm joining, look at this. This is the cross sectional area, but there is a bolt hole here. So this is the length, and there is a bolt hole of diameter 22. And if this is the length is 200, then 200 minus 22 is the effective length, and this is the thickness. So here the width of the plate was 50 mm per pitch in the, like I'm considering per pitch, so 50 mm. So 50 minus 22. I have to subtract the bolt hole area. 0.9 into 410 by 1.25 into 50 minus 22 into 12. 12 is the thickness. So this is the strength of joint per pitch. Strength of solid plate. Now here see, this is interesting because this is important, because when we are taking the net area, we are taking the ultimate strength, ultimate stress capacity. But when we also do a strength of the solid plate per pitch. So this is not where the bolt is. It's a little separate, little away from the bolt. So I consider there is no bolt hole there. So I take the gross area, which is 50 into 12. I don't supply the 22, but in this formula we take the fy. So this is 136. Efficiency of the joint is like, to calculate the efficiency of the joint, we calculate the overall capacity of the joint, which is 99, divided by the gross area, the gross strength, the gross yielding strength. So this is 72% efficiency. Okay, these are also all similar sort of questions. Like these, basically, you need the main formula that we need is the shearing capacity, the bearing capacity, and the tensile capacity. So we know this formula. We know how to we know the mean. If you know the meaning of the terms, you can calculate the values of the what values to put according to whatever problem is given to you. So, and these slides are available. The Google Drive link is available to you, so you can consult these problems and try to solve the remaining ones on your own. Okay. Are there any questions?
Ma'am, can we draw? Done, no?
Yes, yes, you can leave if you don't have any doubts. I'll wait for some time in case anyone has any.